Hello there, my name's Gary and thanks for popping back on the channel. This video is, as the title suggests, is about my thinking in terms of the modular travel pod and outdoor pod that I've been developing. So the thinking behind it and how it's evolved. Then I'll show some example patches in terms of demonstrating or to demonstrate, the sort of range of sounds / genre types of things I can get out of it. And then at the end I might throw in a little look at the small little case that all of this goes into, including the camera, the power supplies, the patches, the cables, and in fact cameras and a few other things that go into one small case that I can actually take on a plane, that I can carry around when I go out into the wilds and that sort of thing. I think the two key reasons why I'm doing this little pod I mentioned in previous videos is really about like plane travel, something to do on the plane, something to do in waiting around at in terminals, and when I get to the destination in terms of creating music in cities or out in the countryside of the place I'm going to. And the second one is very much locally here. I live in a great natural environment, and as a landscape photographer professional that runs workshops and does runs galleries and that sort of thing and licensing, I go out to these areas anyway, so I wanted something that was pretty easy to carry, that I could take, a small power bank like this. This one will last a good 10 hours out and about, or 2. There's another little one to take out when I go to places, and if I get the urge to actually create a piece of music and patch it in real time out in nature. And to me that's kind of a natural thing to do. Interestingly, I've had discussions on Reddit and a couple of other places where people actually think that taking a small thing like this out into nature and recording yourself is, what are the words, pretentious, showing off perhaps, I don't know. Taking expensive things, which is kind of bizarre. It's coming from people with houses literally full of tens of thousands of dollars of this sort of stuff. I mean, this little rack is, 1,500-ish, perhaps US, that sort of area. So anyway, that's. I don't want to get into that discussion, but I think they do see it as kind of a bit crazy playing this in the wilds. To me it's just a natural extension of what I do, but anyway. So like I said, the video is split into the thinking behind the pod, and some patches as to why that thinking, or where that thinking was aimed at, types of sounds and things I can do, and then a little bit on the the actual physicality of moving with it. As you know, for this to work properly for me, I do need, well, I don't need, but it's really enhanced by having the Q Nexus, which I've explained before is a great little device. It can run 3 MIDI tracks, or 2 MIDI tracks and a CV gate track, which is I think going to be my preferred way of using it. I don't necessarily need this to do music, so I'm just checking the camera to make sure it's in shot. I think it is. I don't necessarily need this. I can run sequences and gates from PAMs and actually just use the unit itself as a self-contained, generative type workstation. I'm not even going to call it, well, I suppose I could call it, it's modular. It's a modular workstation in my view. But this enhances it in that I can play things in musically. It it will obviously have a bit of a human element if I'm playing things musically, even if I'm not sequencing them. I can still do, for example, polyphony into, say, the disting EX here, and loop it, so I can actually build up quite rich polyphonic type pieces. I can sequence it as well into anything. But as I said, these two go together and they fit quite nicely. As you can see, it's almost the same size. They fit very nicely into a small case. But anyway, the thinking, so sort of the section on the thinking behind what's in the pod, that was the biggest challenge, deciding what goes in here and what can fit, and moving things around so that the workflow makes sense. And also, you know, the position between things. I know it sounds pretty OCD, but patch cables moving between parts of the gear. I'm a bit like that. Even my main rack, I keep moving things around, even if I switch the position of one or two of them, just so that in the middle of a performance, and literally all the stuff I do is single take, off the cuff performances from nothing, either patch from scratch in a place or indoors or wherever, and then to do a performance, a capture of that with things changing and so on. So it's that thinking behind, you know, deciding, for example, which size patch cables to take with me. You can see I've got these in bundles, and I've already done a few performances to think about what collection of patch cables I need. The sort of main size is this one, which I think is a 30 centimeter, mainly because it can get from one side to the other, as you can see. So it's little things like that, and how many to take are part of the process as well. And then I've just started to, as I've been doing some patches recently, realise that these stackable cables, don't know if you can see them, you know what they are. It basically means that you can duplicate CVs or audio across the patch, are super useful as well. So that's all part of the thinking, and you know, one of the you know, I'll probably link in the description the initial video, which is part of the thinking, but things have moved around quite considerably. One of the biggest ones is I've inverted everything. So now, you know, the output module, headphones and line is on the left, as is, you know, what I call the master chain, if you like, the 4-channel stereo mixer, which is this Doppler one here, and the FX8XL, which is like a global FX, is over to the left side. I was finding that my left hand is, you know, quite good for just going in and doing minor changes to things, and that's often what you'd be doing with the mixer, and you know, and the right hand is much more flexible. It can be doing sliders, turning, you know, knobs very gently, and simultaneously, you know, you could be doing mixing and adjusting sound sources and things with your hands. So that left side was an interesting one, shifting everything over there, and then everything else sort of fell into place. One of the biggest changes in terms of modules that have gone was the Pamela's originally had its expander, so it was using up a full 4 HP, I think, for the expander. And the only reason I had that was so that I could synchronize the sequencer on the Q Nexus, because it sent a MIDI out, and then I could connect using the expander on the right of the Q Nexus, a little box I could connect in. So Pam's became the master tempo, the master clock, sending MIDI out. But I found that you can actually send, and I've configured this on the editor for the Q Nexus, I've actually found I can send a MIDI clock from, sorry, I'm just going to long patch lead out of my little batches here. You can actually send a MIDI clock into Pam's from one of the CV outs of the Q Nexus, and I've even labelled them. So that's the clock gate. So when I connect that, I'm now controlling PAMs from the clock of channel 1, because this has effectively got 4 CV outs as well as 3 channels MIDI, so it's pretty nice. And now the tempo of PAMs and the whole rack, because obviously PAMs is then going to cascade onto the modules, is controlled from the Q Nexus. And the way that works is I can actually press tempo on here. I don't know if you can see the little labels, temp, that I've put on. You can see I can, using the little arrow keys here, actually adjust the tempo of the rack, if you like, from here. And so that's at 130 now, 131, 132 and so on. And that corresponds to the little flashing lights on here. I don't know if you can see 130, and on PAMs it should read 130. And the clock is sending, a technical thing, 24 pulses per quarter note. And that when I'm out and about, I have to reset each time, so it's a bit of a pain. I have to press tempo, I have to choose the output clocks, I have to press gate for a couple of seconds, and then I don't know if you can see those 2 flashing lights, 24. There's basically 4 different settings, 1 pulse per quarter, 2 pulses per quarter, and then 24, I think. So I have to set that each time. It's a bit of a pain when you're out and about. Anyway, the upshot of that is I've now got control of the rack from here tempo-wise, so the 2 are synchronized, without needing a rather big monster box, which I don't know if you ever saw. It was quite a big little thing. Now I can just use this MIDI cable for just doing MIDI, which leads on to the next thing, which is the MIDI modules. So a choice in what I could put in here is I wanted to do 2 channels of MIDI from here. So I chose my 2 current favourite modules to do that. The Disting EX, as you know, is a does loads of things, multi-sampling, wavetables, granulator, polywave tables, it's got an FM synth, all sorts of things. Obviously you can only do 1 at a time, and that's perhaps part of the attraction of having this in here, because, you know, depending on the type of patch you're doing, you can go from, you know, orchestral sounding things to very ambient, traditional modular ambient stuff. You could go to very 80s sounding analogy stuff to you know, quite harsh DX7-y things. So it's a very flexible module depending on what mood you're in and where you are on things, so it depends on that. The Disting operates in stereo as well. Sadly, because of the limited number of input channels here, I would generally run it in mono into one of these channels, which is a shame. I might still think about if there's something I can do here about doubling the input channels up, but the Disting comes with a MIDI unit, so I've got to, you know, sacrifice 2 HP just to have MIDI into it. So the MIDI from the Q Nexus goes into there, and then because my other little favourite module currently at the moment is quite a flexible, the new Godspeed, so I use the MIDI out, or the MIDI through, sorry. Both of them got MIDI through, which is very cool, into the MIDI in of the Godspeed. So now I've got effectively 2 channels going into 2 modules. Now the new Godspeed, I think I've mentioned it before, the reason I'm having it sort of I'm going from left to right, as you probably gathered, is because it's got some nice, very simple sine wavy things that I can use as very smooth sequences. It's also got a quite heavy, complex sounding, even odd type waveform that can create some quite rough, crazy sounds. And you can have 3 separate outputs. I could also run just a sub bass. So in terms of you know, what it can be, it can be bass lines, it can be high sequencer lines, it can be quite complex drones that are quite hard at times. And through the next thing along, the low pass gate, and that's the reason I've got it next to it, I can also envelope shape it very quickly using, you know, a very fast sort of attack release, even faster one, and then one that responds to the gate length. So that those two in conjunction with each other are really quite a good team. I can also obviously feed in the disting or pluck or braids over here through the low pass gate as well, but these two are sort of working together nicely. The disting, as you know as well, can do all sorts of the bigger type instruments like pianos and on the multi-sample side, and voices and talking and all that sort of stuff. The one thing I missed just going from left to right here is the looper. So, you know, I've dedicated 2 HP to this, and I definitely wouldn't lose it, because this gives me the ability to build up quite big polyphony, and, you know, from any of the other instruments or sound sources I can feed into here and then gradually build up layers. I can do it in different modes. There's a sound on sound mode, which is the normal one, and there's even the Frippatronics mode, which allows me to feed things into it, and gradually over time the first ones will disappear and only the new ones will sound. So that's quite useful for certain types of tracks that I'll intend to do. Right, quick drink. The new thing I added to this, which was actually in the original idea of doing this small rack, was modulation. When I had the expander for PAMs, it was fitted, you know, 4 HP, it used up a lot of space, but I really needed more modulation sources, because literally everything, all the sound sources and even the FX8XL has a 3, 4, 5 CV inputs, so I can do all sorts of cool things there. So I needed more modulation sources. I was ending up using like 4 channels of PAMs to do just modulation instead of clocking or sequencing. You know, PAMs Pro here can do 3 key things. One is just your basic clocks, beats if you like, triggers, gates. The other one is sequencing, so you can actually put it into, for example, if I just go into one, hopefully you can see that, I can set like track 1 here, you call it tracks and PAMs, I don't know, output 1 to a random stepped LFO, which looks like that, and then quantize it, and I've got an immediate, I'll go the other way, quantize it, and I've got an immediate sequencer, and I can then say play certain times, do loops, all sorts of things, and I've even got user scales here, which I use quite a lot. So that's the second thing it can do, and the third thing it can do is as an LFO. So if we go back to, that's the scope, just see it's playing notes there. Go back to the waveform. If we put it into like a triangle wave and slow the clock down to something like, I don't know, 1 wave every 5 beats, you can see it coming on and off here. In fact, we can see it on the display. If I go to, whoops, just to see what it's doing, little scope. It's effectively now one of these. And like I said, that third thing, I was thinking, oh, I'm running out of space, I really need this to do the 3 things: sequencing, gating and LFO, and it was just using up too much. So now I've got Oct, which is an 8 channel, basically doing this, which is a triangle wave up and down at different speeds. And the bottom one is extremely slow, and the top one is quite fast. So the fast ones are good for things like vibrato or just, you know, wavering pitches and things. The middle ones are the most useful, the middle sort of 5 and 6. And then these bottom ones are good for perhaps things like effects, you know, sending one of them over there to slowly increase the reverb and then take it back again. But all of these are linear, as in they just go up and down at a very fixed rate. You know, each one of them, if you look at the lights, you can see it's, in fact that one, it almost looks like a clock. It's just up and down. Bipolar means it goes negative and positive. So one of the things I've been doing is dedicating just one output of PAMs to being a random LFO into the master clock of Oct. And what that does is it makes all of these a bit more random, and you've got control over the amount of effect that input clock will have with this little control. So that's a great way of introducing, something that is more interesting. After a while your brain will sort of cut out if everything's just doing a pretty locked in linear up and down type motion. So having this changing that using a random is a great use of one of these outputs. So Oct has really opened up the ability to modulate everything. So I've got like the index CV on Godspeed, I've got the folding, I've got a lot of CVs I can allocate to different parts of the disting. As I said, the effects unit over here, and the main one is probably braids, which has got 3 CV ins. I've talked about braids before. It's got this slider, so I can make this effectively go up and down at rather random intervals. We've got the color, and then we've got this FM input, which is, it's attenuated by this little control. So that's fabulous for creating, pitch wavering, vibrato, or that sort of thing, something more complex, all from Oct. So I can actually use these up pretty quickly if I want to. I've even got CV into this right box, which I've described before. It's a 2-channel sampler in effect for single hit drums, or for loops, or even just for weird stuff. And I dropped in here 64 different types of samples, and it's got a CV in, and on that you can assign what you want to control. And on these, let's call it a single hit sampler rather than drums, you can control the pitch, or you can control the decay, the envelope size, so quite short to quite long, and you can also control the volume of the sounds through the CV in. And that's pretty useful. I think you can also control the samples as well. If you want something crazy like it's cycling through all the sounds, you can actually assign it to that as well. But it's only one, so it's one CV, does one thing. The other uses are into pluck. For example, I can control the decay, which I do quite a lot, which is how long the sound lasts for, versus, and I'll show you examples of this in the patches. And also the damping, which is to do with how muted it sounds. It's a bit like when you hit a string and you're covering it, so it sounds a bit less high frequencies, and then the other way it's more high frequencies. So the Oct is super useful for that. And the other main thing to modulate is, of course, a filter. So annoyingly, I've only got room for sort of one filter because there's a lot going on in this tiny little thing. Imagine if I had something like maths and a couple of other wider modules, I'd literally get 3 things in. So this is sort of overkill, but it allows me to create quite rich tapestry of sounds. Like I said, I could go industrial noise if I wanted, because braids and the disting has got that capability, and this has got some quite nasty sounds as well if I wanted that. Industrially things right through to very fluffy, new agey, soft type stuff. Not ambient, but more melodic type things. And I can do all of that by having a few things at my disposal, which is great. It's got everything. I can also go very drum driven EDM, because this can, as well as doing a loop, it can just do your basic kick, percussion type things, and then you could potentially add on braids. It's got some drum-like modules as well, cymbals, kick, that sort of thing, and all tunable and customizable. The disting has got full drum kits as well, so you can go just with that, braids, disting, you've almost got like a full drum kit. And then you can go sort of bassline on the Godspeed perhaps. Pluck could be doing even a bassline, it's quite good at that sort of thing, and then Godspeed can be doing some sequencing. So, you know, I can take it anywhere, but the filter, I sort of diverged there, didn't I? Went off on tangent. The filter, frequency modulation from here, you can see, and that's why I've got these very short leads actually, just to, for example, you know, just go from a medium fast one into the frequency of the filter, or I can just suddenly take it over to the folding of Godspeed, not MIDI through, okay, the folding's there. These don't quite reach to the other things. You could even modulate bits of PAMs. There's lots of CV modulation you can do there. So the filter, I think I've said before, I'm not sure if it's moved, let me just check the camera. That's all right. The filter, as I've said, is primarily, and that's why I've got it next to, close to braids, is really to calm this down because it's got no filtration in it. It's got its own envelope, which is great, VCA, which is there, and you just turn it on and off, and then you can control it with a gate. And then once you've done that, you've got control over the built-in envelope, the decay, and the attack and things. So that hasn't got a filter, so you really need this to sort of take some of the high end off it, the harshness. I could also use this filter separately. I can't use both at the same time, so it's primarily going to be used as that. To the Godspeed, which has got some harsh sounds as well, which need to be tamed with the filter. With the frequency modulated, you can then do either rhythmic things or, you know, evolving pads and that sort of stuff, because this will do chords in its which I use quite a lot now, anything with the CH at the end of it. So that's sine wave chords. I've got triangle wave chords, square wave chords, sawtooth, and so on. You can create quite rich evolving polyphonic pads with the filter, adjusting that. And the other thing, I explained all the others. Drums I've done, pluck I've done, yeah. So more or less the modules are in their ideal positions, and I've even moved some of them around. I know this sounds kind of really OCD, but some of them are in position because of access to knobs. So if I'm trying to manually adjust the frequency of this MMF, having access to this frequency knob is important. I know it sounds anal, but like I said, putting it next to any of the other modules meant that that particular knob was self-contained in a little box of leads, and you couldn't actually get to it. So if you know what I mean, if I had, let's say I've got, you know, if I had a patch lead on the right of it there, I'd literally have to go in the top and try and turn it. So it's little minutiae like that, which might on the surface seem a bit over the top, but I've had to do that. Even things like access to this little toggle switch on the low pass gate to be able to switch between different types of envelope. Having that easy to get to from the top in this case is important, and this one in the middle. What was the other minor things? Oh yeah, pluck. Its pitch can go a bit out of whack quite occasionally, so access to this little pitch control. I've actually found a way now, just sort of pressing the top and turning it, but having it available so I can just pop in and having some room around it so I can get in there is super important. Any other placement issues? I think no, everything else is sort of. Oh yeah, sorry, the main reason everything was inverted was, like I said, access to things I change a lot. I've noticed, for example, I do go into the drums quite a lot to either change the sound, to turn them up, because I'm actually mixing the drums from here, because on, like if I switch on drum 1 here, press this 3 times, I get to this yellow colour, and that's effectively the output volume. So you have to constantly balance between the two sounds on here, and you can see I can go from, like, drum 1 is fully up now. I could switch to drum 2 and then gradually add it into the mix. I could then go back to drum 1 and turn it down. I can then go to drum 2 and turn it down, all without needing to do anything on the mixer. And it's all coming, it's basically mixing the two sample, let's call them samples. And I think that's kind of the thinking at the moment. The only challenges that I've noticed are the screens. So the Braids 2 is fantastic. Outdoors, I can sort of see this if I'm choosing changing the waveforms, that's great. I can pretty much see these colours outdoors. I sometimes get a little confused when the volume's down. I'm not sure which one I'm on. So as long as I can, flick through them, I kind of know the things: pitch, decay, volume, sound selector. So there's 4 modes there. But the ones that cause the most problems are definitely disting. This tiny little screen outdoors, this becomes invisible. So the chances of you, when I say outdoors, I mean if you're not in the shade or you've got a bit of glare or there's a bit of extra light, it's almost impossible to see. So one of the key things with this is to have presets that are quite close together. So you could even use muscle memory, so load, and you can save a bunch of presets from multi-samples through to exciters to loopers. The things I tend to use most are like the granulator, the poly FM, the multi-sample, and occasionally the poly wavetable, so the more wavetable synthesis. And having those close together is useful. I've got a few multi-samples here from strings there, from piano to an orchestral type sample. I've got a multi-sample which is all sort of talking and weird stuff like that. I've got one which is sort of singing in a very, I can't remember the name of the sample library. It was female singing, doing these lovely effervescent type C minory lines, which is great as a background to something. I could even throw. The thing about the disting is, and why it would be great to see the screen, and perhaps it would be good to have, you can get an extension for it, and I'd have to make a hole through the back here or something, and mount it on here temporarily, so I could sort of plug it in and out for travelling, to see a much bigger version of that. But I think, given what I've seen, even that would be a problem, because it's got same sort of LED-ness to it, and the sun or light hitting it would be a problem. So I'm not sure how to resolve that one beyond just knowing where everything is. Once I know, for example, the order of the presets, I could go in and change them. Actually going in and menu diving is another thing altogether. I wouldn't really do a lot of menu diving. I'd have CVs set up if I was doing some changes to the sound, but that is very much a sort of choose the preset and play it. The other one that is slightly problematic sometimes is PAMS Pro, but I'm finding that I can get by with this. It's pretty easy to see these. In fact, I might change the display outdoors to choose something that's a bit more visible, because that's got this sort of blue on black thing. You can actually have negative versions. I actually tried the ones that work best. So that's the only problematic things in terms of performance. With this module, the Q Nexus has its own issues, and I don't know if you can see those lights in here. When you're playing something, these white lights, or when you're changing like the tempo, being able to see the display or the light rather, is sometimes difficult, because this is white. As soon as the sun hits it, there's absolutely no way you're going to see the lights underneath. But things like changing tracks, if I want to go to the new Godspeed, or if I want to go to the disting, or if I want to go out of the CV outs to one of the instruments, even changing the tracks can be problematic. Sometimes you just got to trust it. You go press that, press track, and then press 2, and I know, even without seeing the lights, that's now going to be activated. You then have to put it into record. So the little flashing light here tells me it's in record, but sometimes most of the time you can't see that outdoors in bright light, so you've just got to sort of toggle it. You go, right, is that in record? No, it's actually in stop, but you won't know until you've played something in and gone, right, it didn't record, so it must be. So there's a bit of that going on, which is unavoidable with this sort of size of setup. You know, it's small, tiny little screens, in occasion tiny little lights that are fighting with daylight. So anyway, so that's the thinking behind the current one. Like I said, the main big difference is having more modulation, which is really important. When you're doing pieces with limited sound, you've got to modulate them, you've got to have things changing all the time. So having 8 LFOs there, possible another 4 if I need them, on PAMs, and then just use these for sort of clocking and a bit of sequencing, is one of the main ones. Sound, like I said, cable wise, just to close that one off, you know, if I'm going into an input here, having these leads, which will get me anywhere, super useful. It just means it takes a bit of pressure off. You know, you're outside, and if you're doing like your audio routing, you just know that picking up a lead and going from output into one of the inputs here is just going to be super easy. Weird sound. And likewise having some set cables. So for a lot of the modulation, for example, I'll use these sort of fixed cables. It just, you know, you can choose a modulation source and literally get to anything you need to. All around here, tiny things like that just takes the stress out of it, because when you're outside or traveling or sat in the middle of a airport terminal or that sort of thing, you don't want to be faffing around with things that can get rid of the flow or get in the way of the flow. You just want to be patching pretty quickly, just picking up a lead and going for it. You know, let's get a clock over here, done, at the right size. And again, a bit of minutiae. Right, I've gone on long enough now, so I'm going to perhaps put 4 or 5 example patches on the video, just explaining what's going on, and then a little bit at the end about the travel thing, actually putting it all in a nice case. And then I think I can probably wrap this this episode up, or this, when I say episode, I mean this whole travel thing, because the rest of it is going to be like, you know, I'm thinking of doing something a bit more ambient, granular, or whatever. So I might replace PAMs with small little like micro clouds or something like that. Or I might move 1 or 2 of the other modules around. I'll also put a screenshot of my main Mantis rack. One of the things I did there was move a few modules around so that when I put these back into the main rack, they're actually going back in blocks. So, you know, like this lot will go in together. This, I think it's 3 blocks. So they all go in, and I've even labeled the power headers so that I can plug them straight back in. So I can actually take this rack, put it back into the Mantis in the space of, you know, maximum 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, just because everything kind of has its place, which is a great thing as well. Anyway, so that's the end of part 1. I'll just go into some patches. I'll play a little taster of it, and then I'll explain what's going on in each patch with a mini performance. So what was going on there? Pretty simple. We had, start from the drums, really basic. We had a hi-hat in track 1, and then I had a drum loop which was sequenced from quite a slow track, Pam's 3 on every 4 beats, which was that beat. They were slightly phased. The phase was slightly pushed because this, particularly for loops, is a little bit delayed. On 1, really simple, a good old Disting soft piano, which I had going through the looper. So I just built up a few piano-y type things on that, on track 3 from here. Kick the delay back a bit. So that had a very human quality. The looper was triggered every 32 beats, so I was able to get a 1, 2, 3, like a 4-bar, 8-bar loop. In fact, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8-bar loop. Godspeed was just doing a simple, just check, 5-step sequence, which I changed every now and then, and it's going through a low-pass gate, so I was able to change the envelope very slightly, and obviously the sound and the octaves. Not sure I did a lot of that, and that was in time with a delay, the global delay here, and that was also modulated by a slowish oct going into the folding, pretty traditional. And the most complex sound again was braids, which had coming from CV gate and out from the Q Nexus, and going through a filter which I had an attenuated LFO on, sort of medium slow. That's the attenuated lead, so that was doing the filtering, cutting in and out. So quiet. Anyway, and what else was going on in braids? I had another LFO, quite a fast one, going into the timbre, which is this red light here. And I was playing some bass notes occasionally. What else was I doing with it? I was thinking I was changing the colour manually. So that is acting as a filter as well. And obviously a bit of volume, the volume's kicking in. And the last thing was quite a fast FM vibrato type thing, so I had it set very low on the attenuator, that wobbly effect. I could have gone a bit more weird with that, of course, but I just had it subtle. Really need this to be less sensitive, because unless you get it right in the middle, just a tiny amount gives you a ton of FM modulation. And that was kind of it, just the 4 channels again. So I hope you like that. It was very traditional, almost songwriting style. And again, like I said, all of these patches are literally 5 minutes, then I go straight into performance, some mistakes, and then I do this little talk. So super easy. Right, so what we got going on there, just some weird sort of beaty thing. What was the tempo of that one, by the way? It was running 146. So we had on channel 1 the disting, which is playing some randomy vocal samples, just as some intro backgroundy thing. So that was coming from Pam's 5, the notes, at every 8 beats, and it was some probability on it as well. Channel 2 we had acting as a bass line. Let's turn the delay down a sec. The pluck, and it was sort of quite damp originally, quite short, and that's being generated by a stepped LFO from Pam's 1, but it's also got a Euclidean, a loop beat. And loop beats are, let's just see what's going on, 8 steps, so it's going to play 8 steps note-wise, and then it's got a wake of 2, so it basically does 8 steps the same, and then it changes the next 8, and then it goes back to the original 8. And the trigger for it, you can hear, is quite random. That's on, let's have a look, 60% times 2, so it's occasionally playing. A bit like the kick as well, which I've got on a similar thing. Just turn everything apart from the kick down. The kick is coming from Pam's 3, and that's set to a probability of 90%. So rather than fall to the floor, it's just going to miss a few every now and then. And it sort of works with the pluck. The idea being that the chances of them both being not there are slimmer. So I'll put the kick on one side and you can hear it. I also had from track Pam's 4, a little hi-hatty percussion thing, and that was on a probability of 29%, but it was quite a fast one, so it was this sort of effect. Let's turn the kick down a second, just so we can hear what the hi-hat thing was doing. I was actually going to double that up so it was more that sort of speed, but it didn't quite feel right. And I was changing the sound on the fly, so I was going from different high percussion sounds. Right, and the more interesting part of this one is on braids. I had it set on a gate from PAM 7, which was quite fast, ×4. Oh no, it was at the end, sorry. So it was doing that at the end. I think originally it was doing, I was actually changing it. So yeah, so this is one of the things I was changing. I was going from like a 1 to these polymetric-y, polyrhythm things against the kick. Let's put the kick on, you can hear what's going on. Is it that one? No, I've changed it. And I was also changing the notes, so I've got the CV. So I could get quite inventive. To confuse matters even more, or not confuse them, but keep them varied, I've also got a modulation, actually from PAMS, a stepped LFO, just check. Yeah, stepped LFO on 50% level, going into the colour, which actually changes the wavetable, because this is set on a wavetable thing. So this slider going up and down will change the sound effectively. So that's why you heard it constantly changing as well as changing the note. We're also getting different sounds coming out every 4 steps. So if we go back to the gate, and I was playing quite high in some places, and also I think I went to triplets at one point. So all of that together, you just heard, got something quite weird. Obviously, I don't want to get into it. I could have done something much more 4 to the floor, used some of the drums. I've got drum kits in here, and been very specific, and just got something, you know, a traditional drum beat going, perhaps with a little gating on here and compression and things, but I just wanted something a little different. For this I didn't use Godspeed in that one, and really Disting was just doing some background things. Oh yeah, like that one. Next. Right, hope you can hear me. So a quick explanation of that patch. On channel 1 we've got the disting, which is on track 3, MIDI 3. From here I can play it in live. It's going into the looper and it's playing this orchestral multi-sample. I've got an overall bit of reverb on here. I can go pretty heavy on the reverb if I wanted. I'll just make it more or less quite dry just so you can hear things. So that was on the looper on a sound on sound mode, and I played that in manually. Just make sure I'm on track 3. Yeah. And when it's in record, when the red light's on, we're basically adding to the loop. On track 2 we had the new Godspeed playing this loop, and I was modulating the amount of the bass that comes in, so the FM bass. So I don't know, it's coming in, let me just, so it's that extra element. And that was played in live just before the patch, and I can change it obviously. And control the fold to give it a bit more punch. I could have changed the sounds, and one of the things I do a lot is just to choose the different, and I can make it go pretty hard and crazy. But that was channel 2. Channel 3 was really quite a nice chord sound from Braids, which has got a modulation on the filter. So let me just, there's a bit of ringing because I'm feeding my mic through the speakers. Sorry, so what Braid is doing is, let's turn the filter up a bit. So I occasionally use this attenuation cable just because going from oct straight into the filter just makes it too far. It goes from almost no filter to quite a lot. So this little attenuation cable is definitely something I'd take with me everywhere. I've got a couple of them just in case I need to attenuate something. So just by changing this little slider here, I can, you can see I can control how much width the filter has. So that's Braid being fed through there. I'm also controlling using a modulation on the timbre, which is effectively giving it how many notes are in the chord. So it would go from quite sparse type chord right through to quite a lot of notes, quite thick. I'm not changing the colour, I'd sometimes do that manually. That gives the type of chord. You can hear it changing. I could put a slow modulation on that so the chords are changing. And that was being played in, as you can see that's on a fixed note at the moment. So track 1 is going from CV2 in this case, which is just playing the chord. So if I want a different feel, let's press the G. And because this is in chord mode, I'll just show you, we have, the quantize is Aeolian, which is a minor scale, and the root is C, so it's basically a C minor. So whenever I play a note on here, it's going to choose a chord within that C minor scale. And depending on the chord setting, I think this is like a major 7. I can change it. Still got to learn actually what the slider is depending on which chord mode you've got. So that worked straight away with, this basic sequence. And then in the only other element, it was a pretty simple patch, was the drums. So I had two little, and I threw them in these on last minute. We've got a this sort of hi-hatty thing, just keeping beat. I'll play it with a bit of the sequence. So remember the sequence for this is coming off Q Nexus for Godspeed, and this is just being triggered with a straight clock from Pam's. I could have put some probability on this so it only played every now and then, but I didn't. So there's a bit of a hi-hat sound, and on the other channel of the track I've got a sort of clicky, slightly out of time, Horses hoovy thing, and obviously I can change the pitch of that. And what I'm doing here is changing the pitch on the fly. I could actually put that on a CV if I wanted, something more interesting. More of a triplet feel there. And then the whole lot together. So I don't think there was anything else. Obviously the loop was being triggered automatically from I think it was step, Pam's 4. This black lead, it's been triggered every 32 beats. I can change that to 64, 128, I can have really long loops. Or I could do something quite rhythmic and actually feed the drums into the looper if I wanted on like a 4-step loop or something, but not for now. So that was that patch. Slightly more orchestrally sounding, orchestral new agey, it's partly ambient. I think rhythmic ambient, where you've got things moving in a quite linear way, like the sequence. And the drums are not really ambient, they're more sort of something else, but okay. Okay, so what was going on there? We had on one the granulator on disting, and that was pure straight out, and I was adjusting the position of the grains around a pre-recorded sample. On two, turn the reverb down a bit. On two we had New Godspeed, but that was being played directly from CV, from track 1 on here. So Q Nexus is sort of dedicated as track 1 CV gate. I didn't have the gate, I didn't need the gate for that one, it was just playing a sustained sound, and I was obviously changing it from various different sound types. And that was attenuated modulation on the index CV, or in the sine mode it was bringing in and out the bass line, or the bass, sub-bass, an octave down. What else was going on with that one? I think that was it, pretty simple on the New Godspeed. So that was acting as like something manual, because I always like something manual to play. I don't just do generative things. But speaking of generative, we had a couple of weirdy things going on. Weirdy being the operative word. So on braids, we had quite a lot. We were modulating the timbre and the colour for this vowel sound. And that was just literally on a sustained C note, so there was no CV and gate going in, it was just purely its root C. And we had a couple of modulations going into the timbre and colour, like I said, these two. And the modulation itself was being modulated just to give it some variety. So if we just listen to that. So we had that sort of thing cutting in and out. And then the drums was, I think I mentioned this earlier in some intro, were on a random LFO from PAMS, because, you know, this doesn't do random, Oct doesn't do random very well. The expander has a bit of that, but generally it's pretty uniform. So 4 was a slow, high probability random wave. It wasn't stepped, it was just non-linear. And that was sending a CV into this drum sample unit, and that was actually changing the sounds. So we had, hopefully I haven't changed it, but it would have been going up and down, changing the preset, the sample, and you can hear it happening there. So that's quite a nice way of getting something kind of odd going. The trigger was interesting as well. We had, if I just go to the shape, it was sort of this fast pulse wave. It was like 3 or 4 pulses and then a gap, and that was on a width of 91%. So that was doing the triggering, that sort of fast da-da-da-da-da thing. Sounds like a sort of inset going. And that was it from the drums. It was just purely preset changing. Occasionally I'd go in and adjust the overall tuning for whatever sound it picked up on the random. I think at one point I went quite high and then went low again. And then obviously there was a lot of effects. The usual delay, so we've got long delay, quite a lot of feedback on the delay, and then I had quite a lot of shimmer up. Tended to use this for these preset demos just because it's easy. I've actually got 32 different effects in here, which I should have varied, but just for the hell of it, to get delay and reverb. And then I was also doing the dry mix changes as well. So yeah, I could obviously do more odd stuff. PAMS has randoms. I could go 8 randoms out of there and just do all sorts of random things into all the modules. The granulator, I just sort of pulled that in because as I was developing the patch, I sort of went from the drums into this vowel thing, which is so those two, and then I added thinking of a solo thing using the growly part of just turn the sequence off. So I was using the growly part of this, and I was also doing Bit of pitch bend here on the Q Nexus to get some really interesting effects. And Right, so what was going on there? I had a mix of sequencing from PAMS and some sequencing from the Q Nexus to show that two can work in sync very well. So on, let me just kill the loop. From PAMS 1, I was sending a sequence, random-ish, tuned obviously, stepped LFO into disting, which was in poly FM mode, which was set to a marimba at the start, this sort of thing. And then I had the looper triggered every 32 beats, I think. Could have been shorter actually, this one. In FRIP mode, which is, I think I mentioned before, it's where it gradually gets rid of the first layers. So as you've got this sort of sequence building up, it's building up polyphonically because it's playing, you know, a random thing out of here into the looper and gradually building up the layers. The second element was a new Godspeed, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was playing something quite sharp at the start in a higher register. So that was being sequenced from track 2 of Q Nexus, and I think the original was up here somewhere. And that's got the sub-octave in, you can hear. It's also modulated the index, and so it was going from quite a slow. So on the oct, by the way, just on global modulation, I've got a slowish LFO going into the main tempo control for oct, and that's being controlled by this reverse attenuation, so the effect it's having is slowing it down. So if I start oct quite fast, you can hear it changing the new Godspeed index there from this LFO. You're going to hear it less because of the short low pass gate I've got. If I put it there, you'll be able to hear it modulating better. Right, anyway, so that was that one. Track 3, I had actually had another slow sequence coming from PAMS 5, and I always put the triggers next to them, so track 5 with 6 as the gate, and it was doing a 1 every 8 beats, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, 1 every 8 beats, playing this sort of bass thing. So I wanted this as like a bass chord which sat underneath everything. And I had these sequences panned either side. And then over the top of all of that, I had the CV 2 and 3, gate and CV going into braids, which, track 1, was on that sound. It wasn't going through the filter, so it was pretty harsh. I've got a little bit of modulation on the timbre. So that sort of crisp sound, and again it was built-in VCA, so gate and CV, and trying to remember the waveform it was on. I was on the saw wave. So with that one, I could have gone pretty low if I wanted, and I went quite high, but then I noticed there was a bit of drifting, so I don't know whether it's the Q Nexus or this, which is not ideally tuned. So that's quite a nice solo sound. So the whole lot together, obviously this marimba thing built up after a while, and the added delay, of course, 8th crotchets, a little bit of reverb. Bass notes. Just worth mentioning that all these patches were probably done in 5 minutes tops, so just quickly choosing them. And that's one of the advantages of using these little baby systems, is that it's very easy to change things around and just take it into a direction you want. Right, I did promise you I'd show you the little travel bag, its current state. I think I did a bit of this previously, might have done, but I don't think I had it all sort of worked out. So this is the case. It's a UDG gear box. I actually got it for the Analog 4, so I used to put the Analog 4 here and that, but now I can get this whole modular kit in. So the main modular pod sort of sits there. Nice bit of space around it. The Q Nexus, which is quite important, I put here. The keyboard's quite robust, durable, so it's not too bad. The important power supply and this MyVolts USB adapter and this special cable that that handles the 15-volt requirement for this. Sort of just tucks in here. I've got various things. I've actually got a backup power supply which can fit in here, but normally I have this camera. So the camera you're watching this on is the Q8N 4K, and that actually fits in this space, but I'll just put that spare for now. This section, I normally have my second camera because I sometimes have 2 cameras rolling, and there's even a third camera, which is my little Insta360. I use that for when I go to places I can't actually do aerial droney things, so I sort of squeeze this in here. And there's also a little mini tripod which I use, which I'll put in here. Right, this top section, so that's quite good. There's tons of space here as well, so that's the main bit. This padded area sort of protects this. Generally it's not patched, but I have done it with a little bit of patching. All these cables sort of fold flat. Let's carry on. At the back of this section I have a few, these are laminated. It's got like the, so that's the FX-Aid patches. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got all the various algorithms. And then this one is the samples on the drums. So, no, sorry, that's the, no, I haven't got the samples on the drums yet. These are 2 other things, sorry. That's the sounds on the braids, the micro braids, 2, and these are all the waveforms and samples on the disting. So it's really a reference if I forget where a sound is or something. That just fits the back of that section. And then we've got really a whole bunch of bags of things. The important cables. These are all grouped with little cable ties, so that's one of the main ones. This is the Q Nexus bag. It's got the power supply for the Q Nexus. This power supply will really run it for days, to be honest. I charge it up and then forget about it for a week or 2. And it's got all the CV cables and the power supply, so that's the Q Nexus bag. This is a spare and extra power, so some of these are specialised, like USB-C to barrel, which allows me to connect if for some reason the MyVolts doesn't work. I've also got USB-Cs for like the GoPro, for the second camera and things. We've got, I don't know, I've got a whole bag for just this Q Nexus MIDI lead because it's quite long, but quite an important one. I've only got one of those. And this is actually part of the camera when I'm doing proper recording, because this camera will take XLRs from mini jack, which connects the modular straight to the camera. For when I'm out and about, I'd normally use my, I don't know where they are, my Biodynamic DT770s, the sort of big closed ear ones, but I'm just using these Shure Professional in-ear ones now for this portable case. It's I can't remember the model number, but they were quite expensive when I got them. I've had them, I think, getting on for 20 years now, so they're great for taking around. And then I've actually got a couple of small tripods, but this is one I use with this for certain applications. I've got a proper 3-legged tripod I use as well, which normally goes in my camera bag that I carry around with this lot. But that sort of goes in there, and then literally the whole lot zips up and away we go. And there's a bit of a shoulder strap, so even if I've got a backpack on, I can carry this lot pretty easily, and it's not a big thing, you know. For my size, this just looks like a mini handbag or something, or a laptop case, and it's all in one thing ready to go. So hopefully you found that useful.